Good afternoon, everyone. So we are testing out Ring Central's webinar feature, and this is our first time doing it. So we were doing some last minute testing there. In just a minute, I'm going to start recording this so that we can get it ready to go to YouTube after, because that's how most of our owners watch these. But for those of you that did join today, thank you so much. We will probably have a few more join, and then most people will watch it after the fact. But what we'll do right now is I will get this recording. Good afternoon again. My name is Brad Randall with Welch Randall, Real Estate and Property Management, and this is our 2025 Quarter 1 owner meeting. We are super grateful for all of you taking the time today, as well as those that are watching this after the fact. We hope you had a safe and happy holiday season, and we're really excited to be here. Just a couple of things before we move into the full content. There's a couple of agenda items we just want to go through. So first off, a number of you have reached out just regarding timing of those year-end owner statements that happen at the end of each calendar year. So those will be released between the 16th and the 31st of January. During the first half of the month, we are getting rent received and getting that all input and getting owners paid. And then the second half of the month, we do the owner's statement. We have toyed with the fact, or we've toyed with the idea of potentially doing it opposite in January, but getting owners paid has definitely taken a higher priority for us and for our owners than getting that wonderful year-end statement. So we promise you the year-end is coming, but thanks for your patience with it. Now, for today, the theme of today is what's coming next. So we are, like we talked about, we've done these pretty much quarterly for the last few years. We started over COVID. This year, we are beginning the year talking about some investor tools that we want you to be aware of. And in particular, we want to talk about some of the changes or legislative items that you might want to be aware of. And then in addition to that, we're going to talk about some of the tools that we have. One new tool in particular called Blanket. And then we'll do a little bit of a market update. And in between each of these, we'll have some time for Q&A. And once again, if you do have questions, we are here to help. We're happy to help. This is why we're here. So we really appreciate you taking the time, however and whenever you're watching this, if you're not watching it live. We're going to begin with a legislative update and some new laws from landlords. And this is from Jeremy Shorts. Jeremy Shorts is one of our longtime partners over here at Welch Randall. And Jeremy is one of the amazing resources that we have that we bug probably more than we should. Because as the management environment becomes more and more complex, we have to have great resources on the legal side to make sure we are able to represent owners and investors' needs and treat residents fairly and make sure that we're moving forward that way. So Jeremy Shorts, he is one of the leading resources for the Utah Residential Housing Association. He served on that board for a number of years. He runs his own company, and he also produces an amazing monthly newsletter that he provides to anybody that subscribes that goes through updates and things that you should be aware of. So Jeremy, I'm going to turn it over to you, and please feel free to take the next few minutes to share some of these updates that would be beneficial to our owners.
Perfect. Thanks, Brad. So as Brad mentioned, our law firm focuses on landlord-tenant representation. If you ever need an attorney, I would tell you to find somebody that's all that they do. That's what they specialize in, because if it's outside of landlord-tenant issue, we won't touch it because that's not what we're good at. So Yeah, we've worked with Brad and Welch Randall for a long time, and we appreciate working with them. They do a good job. So I'm going to share my screen here. I wanted to go through, can everybody see that? We good? So I wanted to go through some of the new laws that might come up. And by the way, I mean, some of the trainings that we do, I have a full hour of material that we could cover. I'm just going to focus on some of the highlights because we have a much longer training that we go through with Welch Randall that goes into a lot more detail. But I just wanted to focus on some of the things that as owners, you guys might be interested in that would help you as you're letting Welch Randall manage your properties there. Real quickly, I wanted to do a quick update of how bills become laws. Normally, let me just give you an example. If a bill is introduced in the House of Representatives on the state level, it's got to go through a committee, and there's an opportunity for public debate and comment. And that's something that's really valuable. And I know Brad has spent some time, and he's gone to some of those hearings and those committee meetings to be able to have his input on it, because we've got a pretty good smart legislature, but they really rely on the professionals in this industry because they don't do it as much as we do. And so that opportunity for debate and public comment becomes really important. And at the committee level, if it's approved, it doesn't become a bill. They just vote on whether or not to recommend that it continue. And if it passes that stage, then it goes to the full House of Representatives, where there's additional debate and then a vote on the House floor. And if it passes that, then it goes through a similar process on the Senate side. It's a committee that has more debate and public comment, and then a similar vote to recommend it, and then it goes to the full Senate floor. And if it passes all of that, then it ends up on the governor's desk. And if there's any amendments or anything, it's supposed to be a slow, tedious process because we want to be careful about what bills we're passing and how we proceed. And so I'm going to go through a few bills, but just realize anything that we talk about that is successful in becoming a statute, it's gone through this process. So I'm just going to hit on a handful of them from 2024. The 2025 legislative session hasn't started yet. It's going to start in a few weeks and will end in March. And so we have an idea of a few of the things that might come up, but there's really not a whole lot that's set in stone. And so I'm going to go through these 4 bills that came up from last year. There was one that came up from Representative Acton. She wanted to prohibit automatically renewable contracts that are a surprise. So if you have any subscription services that might last for a year, if you don't cancel it towards the end of that year, then it automatically renews for another year, and people are getting surprised by that. And so this is an example of what the Rental Housing Association does behind the scenes, because at first glance, I mean, this could impact if there's a contract that automatically renews, that this could implicate or address these contracts. And so it came in, and we negotiated with the bill sponsor and said, we see your concern. Are you concerned about that with real estate contracts, with lease agreements, that type of thing? And so working with the bill sponsor, they were able to exempt several real estate contracts. And when everybody works together, you can see it passed the House and the Senate with unanimous votes, 72-0 and 26-0 on the Senate side. So just realize those are the types of things we dodged a bullet because there's not any more regulation on that, because the Housing Association is involved in a lot of what happens there. The next bill dealt with fair housing requirements. If you've ever had a fair housing complaint, you know what that feels like. It's not a good feeling at all. And one of the things, this was a really good bill because under the old statute, it's the UALD is the labor commission that handles, it's the Fair Housing Office basically. They handle fair housing complaints. And if the UALD issues a ruling against the landlord and the landlord's not happy about that ruling, then you can appeal it. And the old statute said the appeal would be handled by the Utah Attorney General's office. And it said that the Utah Attorney General's office should support and enforce the Fair Housing Office's rulings. Well, what happens if the Attorney General's office views it differently, or maybe they want to settle it? And so it kind of tied their hands, because even if they wanted to view the case a little bit differently than the Fair Housing Office had, the statute required them to support and enforce those rulings, even if maybe they had a different view of it. And so what this did is it allowed the Attorney General's office to take a fresh look at the case, and maybe they want to take a different approach. Maybe they want to potentially settle the case. And so it softened that language of support and enforce to allow them to reevaluate cases, because sometimes that process with the Fair Housing Office brings out other facts and circumstances that the Attorney General's office might find compelling, and so this allows them to do that. So that was a helpful change there. This is an example of, one of the reasons you hire a property management company is so that you don't have to worry about a lot of the things that we're talking about. But over the last few years, there have been a few bills that have been along these lines. This bill in 2024, right now, Utah law states that to terminate a month-to-month contract, you have to give at least 15 days notice or comply with your lease. And most leases are a 30-day notice. And so most of the time, the statute doesn't even come into play anyway. But what this does is it required 60 days notice for any rent increases, or 60 days for other changes to the lease. And so there was a lot of discussion on this. And by the way, the year before, they ran a bill at 90 days. And so that failed. And so this year in 24, they ran a bill at 60 days, hoping that that would pass. And after some of the discussion, and you can see it made it through the House side. The committee voted in favor of it. It went to a full House vote and it passed. But then it got to the Senate committee and it failed 2-5. And so that killed the bill for this year. But I think that that's gonna come up again this in 2025. So expect that to come up, and if there's any changes, Welch Randall would comply with those and make sure that you don't have to worry about it. But I do expect some similar opposition, because this has been, I think, the third year that a similar bill has come up in the last 5 years. There might have been one year that it didn't come up as a bill, but the other years it has. So I wouldn't be surprised if something new came up again in 2025. And this is one that it didn't pass. You can see that it was held, but this is definitely going to be something on the agenda for 2025. Right now, with Welch Randall and all of their realtors and the real estate agents that work with them, they're required to be licensed, and that licensing requirement, I think it's about 100 hours of training that you've got to do. And out of that 100 hours, it focuses very, very heavily on real estate sales. And there's very little, I think 4 to 6 hours of training on management. And so to become a property manager, you have to be trained in 100 hours of training with very little of that training focused on property management. And those are really two different beasts. If you're really good at sales, that doesn't mean that you're good at management. And if you're really good at management, that doesn't mean that you're good at sales. And so what this is going to do is it's going to try to create a separate licensing track for property managers. And it's really going to, and this doesn't impact Welch Randall a lot, because they are already in this industry. They know their stuff. They're already doing these trainings, even though they're not required. But across the board, I think it's going to help a lot of property managers just to create more training, more classes. They're going to be focused on the management side of being a landlord instead of the sales side of purchasing properties. And it was brought up across the board. I think there was a lot of support for it, but it's a pretty big change. And there's going to be a lot of moving parts and a lot of things that need to be worked out. And so it didn't pass, but it didn't fail. They held on to it so that they can work through it over the last year, and they've been doing that work. And so I expect this to come back up. And I think there's a really good chance that this is going to pass and just structure a separate path for property managers to be licensed in a way that's helpful to them and focused on property management issues. So those are the main things from 2024. In 2025, here's a list of a few of the things that we think are going to be coming up. The first one is what we just talked about, the property management licensing amendments. That's going to be at the top of the list. They've spent a lot of time working on it to try to get language finalized and ready to go so that it's polished and good for the legislative session this time. And then we are expecting another 60-day notice of rent increase, and that's a repeat from 2024, but also 2023, and I think 2022. It's been around for a little while, and I expect that to probably come back. I don't know that it's going to go anywhere, but it's probably going to come back. And then I don't know if you've seen this, but nationwide, there's been some kickback on, the very wealthy corporations getting into the landlord business and purchasing a substantial amount of the single family home market to be landlords. And so there's rumbling that there might be a bill that would prohibit corporate ownership of rental housing. I would be very interested to see how that would work in not just in the United States, but in Utah, where it's a very property ownership friendly state. We encourage property ownership and we try to help out small landlords especially. So I don't know that that's going to go anywhere, but there's rumblings of a bill that may or may not come up because of that. And then Brad wanted me to cover just some legal concerns for owners and maybe some things that you guys should be considering. The first and foremost thing that I would tell you to deal with is to work through is to hire a good property manager, and you've already done that. If you've hired Welch Randall, they do a good job. I don't know if you remember growing up in the 80s and 90s, the Ronco electric food processor or food dehydrator with Ronco. It's the old set it and forget it. And that's, if you hire a good property manager, that's what you've done. Let them work through this. They'll keep you updated with things, specific questions or concerns, but they're going to take care of, like I said, the class that we do for this legislative update training is typically an hour long. We go into a lot more detail, but I just wanted you guys to be aware of some of the specific things that would maybe impact you. But we go through a lot more detailed issues when we talk with Welch Randall. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up with you is there are some federal issues, and I need to update this slide. The Federal Trade Commission has and the White House has come out against what they call junk fees. And there's a lot of times where this came up is online ticket sales for like concerts and things like that. We've all done that where you're going to some event and they say the tickets are $80. And by the time you're checking out, they're $115 because they've got a miscellaneous fee that just adds, sometimes in that situation, 30, 40, 50% of the underlying ticket cost is added to the balance that you've now got to pay. And so the White House, the Federal Trade Commission has come out against those. And I have in here, we were wondering how it would play out with lease fees if they weren't properly disclosed, or how things would happen with fees listed on a lease. They did come out, it's just been within the last week or two, and they have stated that they would exempt leases and property management companies. So this is helpful that it's a federal issue that they've been monitoring, but that should be off the table for right now. And the White House, it's been a couple of years now, but they came out with a renter's bill of rights. If you wanted to Google it, you can get more information. And they have 5 main points that are all listed here. And you look through this, and the first thing they want is safe, quality, accessible, and affordable housing. Well, that's fine. We want the exact same thing. But where we differ is they want to enforce those standards through different government agencies. And that's where we look and say that doesn't seem like the best way to handle that. Same thing with they want clear and fair leases, but that's what they put on paper. But what they mean is they don't want a clear and fair lease that the landlord picks. They want a clear and fair lease that the government has say in what that is. And so you see how, and as you go through this list, it's a similar thing. Overall, we agree on a lot of the same principles, but the implementation of those is where it becomes an issue and a problem. And this was, they had attempted a rent increase cap that they were trying to impose for 5%. And if you didn't comply with that, then they would withhold some federal funds. So if you're strictly on the fair market side, you don't need to worry about this. But I had to laugh because this was I think it was a Facebook post from the National Apartment Association back in July of last year. And one of the comments on this post was like, great, so everything's capped at 5%. I'm totally fine with that because we're going to cap utility increases at 5% and tax increases at 5% and our other hard costs, because as landlords, for every dollar that you get in rent, you have bills and expenses that need to come out of that. So the comment was sarcastically saying, great, we'll cap the rent at 5% as long as we get to cap our costs at 5%. And of course, that's not how that's going to work. And so it was just kind of a humorous way to look at rent control, of saying that'd be great if it worked all the way across the board, but since it doesn't, let's just come to the reality of that doesn't work, and we need to just let the market control it. So those were the main things I had. Brad, you wanted to go through some question and answers?
So and thank you so much, Jeremy. As you look at this upcoming year, Utah historically has found themselves in a pretty good spot compared to a lot of other states in the nation when it comes to how owners and investors can work with their properties. Do you, at least as of right now, do you feel like Utah remains in a good position from a legislative standpoint, or are you more concerned? I will have owners. I had a couple owners say, are we going to become Colorado, or are we going to become California? And I'm not trying to dog on those two states, but from a management standpoint, they are harder. They're more challenging. So any thoughts on that?
Well, I think if you would have asked people in Colorado, 10, 15 years ago, be would we be doing things like California? And they probably would have said no. And so, who knows what the future holds for Utah, but it is concerning. I mean, back, not that long ago, the problem children of legislative intervention was, California, New York, Washington, D.C. And there's an annual legal conference for the National Apartment Association that I try to go to. And that list has now grown. I mean, there's a lot of problems, like you mentioned. Nevada's on that list, Colorado's on the list, Washington and Oregon, and there's other states around New York and Washington, D.C. that are also having problems. But overall, I think Utah does a pretty good job of remaining balanced and looking at what other states are doing and finding out what works and what doesn't work. And so I think we've been able to keep that balance. But I mean, when we go to that conference, we just kind of sit in the corner with our Utah group and just kind of say, we do have it pretty good, because you hear this last time it was in Fort Worth area in Texas. And the attorney that was there from New York, he said that if the tenant requests a continuance on an eviction hearing, the court just bumps it 60 days out automatically. And if they go to the next hearing and they ask for an additional continuance, they could get it bumped another 60 days potentially. So he said, best case scenario on a straightforward non-payment case, they can be in the 3 to 6 month range to work through an eviction. And in Utah, we're about 2 to 4 weeks to work through it. And I thought that was pretty good until the guy from Louisiana raised his hand and said, we're normally about 9 days. And so we're not the fastest, but we're not the slowest. There's different things that you can kind of work through. But I think Utah does pretty good of balancing those rights between landlords and tenants.
That's great. Thank you. And so as we look at what's coming up next, I think the first thing to note from a legislative standpoint is Utah is still a very favorable place to be that way. Not perfect, not necessarily, without our own issues, but still very favorable. Now, I opened up below in the Q&A, because only the panelists can speak. If you want to ask Jeremy a question, please feel free to go to the Q&A on the lower part of your bar, and you can ask a question. Jeremy, one more that I'm just realizing that we have had some owners reach out to. You mentioned that in Utah, evictions, you can work through an eviction in 2 to 4 weeks. Do you, and I know this is kind of a loaded question, when do you advise on trying to push forward with an eviction? And when do you potentially advise on holding off on an eviction, or just trying to get the tenant out? Because even though you get the tenant out, that's not to say you get paid back in 2 to 4 weeks. So I know we could do an hour on how an eviction works, but what advice would you give? Because we are hearing that delinquency is kind of going up nationwide. So if renters are paying late, I mean, just what are your thoughts on evictions and moving forward with that?
Yeah, good question, Brad. And for me, 9 times out of 10, it's best to work with your tenants. Just communicate with them, try to come to some agreement. An eviction is the last step or the last option if you're running into problems. And even after we file an eviction, there's still a decent amount of times that we settle cases in the middle of an eviction. And we can do that and just say, okay, here's the balance. How do we handle this? What do we want to do? But I think there are 3 times where I would recommend don't work with them. Let's just move forward with an eviction. Number 1 is if there are problems outside of non-payment. If they're being a nuisance and damaging the property, having them pay the rent that's probably their biggest obligation as a tenant. If they're causing problems outside of non-payment, then I would probably tell you to consider still moving forward with the eviction. The second and third thing are kind of related. If you've got a tenant that goes silent on you, it's really hard to negotiate and work through a problem with somebody where they're going silent. And the third thing is similar. If they're lying to you, it's really hard to negotiate and work through a settlement if somebody's not telling the truth. So I think for me, generally speaking, across the board, it's best to work with tenants, and we can help do that even if we have an open eviction. But if they're causing problems outside of non-payment, if they're going silent, or if they're lying to you, those are things that we probably just need to move forward with an eviction.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, a question that came in. Jeremy, once a judgment is obtained through a court, are there good ways to collect on that judgment if the tenant is out of state? Collection agency, attorneys, other means?
Yeah, good question.
In Chicago?
Yeah. The 2 best options for collection are either a wage garnishment or a bank garnishment, and it's in that order. The best one, I think, is a wage garnishment. But those only work if they're in state. And so if we know where they're working, we can verify employment. And once after a judgment is entered, then we can get a wage garnishment in place. For a bank, I say bank garnishment, but it really works for any financial accounts, really, or the large majority of financial accounts. And we don't even need to have, you don't need to have account numbers. We just need to know the institution that's holding the funds. And we can, with that, with just the name of the bank, we can provide the bank with the name and their personal information, and any accounts they have in their name can be frozen to be collected and paid towards the judgment that's issued. That's the good news, but the bad news is sometimes they don't have anything in those accounts. They've either moved out of state or the account balances are 0. And if they're out of state, you would need to transfer the Utah judgment to that state and then collect on the judgment in that other state. And so collections in general can be tricky, but yeah, if they move out of state, it just depends on what state they move to, because some states' laws are maybe they're more favorable or less favorable than Utah, but you'd have to transfer it to that state and then have somebody in that state work to collect on it.
That's perfect. Jeremy, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. Once again, thank you as always, and we appreciate it. Thanks again, Jeremy.
No problem.
Now, as we move into our next segment, we just want to highlight a couple of things. Obviously, our role at Welch Randall is to try to find ways to help you as investors succeed and your properties succeed. One of the things that we've done to try to do that was we brought on in 2024 an owner manager. Many of you know that initially I was kind of running point as the owner manager, the business development manager, and whatever other titles there may be. And for those of you that know me well enough, you know that I'm not a very smart human. So for me doing all of that, it creates, chaos and a little bit of headaches that way. The great thing is we have been blessed and we are surrounded by some really good people. We have Julie in our office who helps make sure your statements go out. We have Trista who watches our brokerage like a hawk to make sure that everything is happening. And now we have Thomas Erickson, who's our owner relations manager, and Nathan Halverson, who is our current resident manager. So Nathan works with lease renewals, tenant issues, resident issues, and concerns that way, while Thomas will also work with owner issues and bringing on new properties, going through concerns that owners have, and introducing owners to tools that we have. And so I'm going to turn the time over to Thomas for this segment on investor tools to talk about a couple of those tools available, and then introduce our next speaker, Ben with Blanket.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the introduction, Brad. And as he mentioned, I've actually been in this new owner relations manager role just under a year. But prior to that, I was working in property management just with a different company for about 3 years, 3 years total. I've been in the industry. And so it's been a fantastic opportunity. I've loved getting to meet our owners over this last year. I've gotten to chat with most, if not all of you, but I do know there are still several that I haven't had as much interaction as I would have liked. And so please don't hesitate to ever reach out to me. I try to make my contact information very available. Call, text, email. I'm open on all those lines of communication. We want to make sure you feel heard and you have your advocate there. Our services our priority is you as the owner and to protect you and your property. And so we want to make sure you've got all the necessary resources. And I've loved the Q&A that we've had with Jeremy and some of the questions that were brought up there. Brad even mentioned one big thing that we're noticing happening nationwide, and that's an increase in delinquency. We also heard them mention the struggle it is to collect when one of our owners goes through an eviction, and the difficulties that can be there, and the large delay that can exist at that time. And so one of the awesome tools that we've been able to introduce into our services is called SureVestor. Now we've been offering this service for a little over a year, I believe, and we've been trying to roll that out. We've got several of our owners that have already started using it, but it's still for the most part pretty new. And so I wanted to just take a few moments before we jump over to Ben to introduce and talk a little bit more about what SureVestor is and why it's important. And it really is there to help kind of provide that financial relief to our owners in those very worst case scenarios when we're going through an eviction or someone's very delinquent and behind on their payment. So I'm just go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to show just a quick little document that was created by SureVestor. Now SureVestor is a company that partners with property management companies such as Welch Randall, ourselves, and to provide the service to landlords. Now you can only access this insurance if you hire us, and so you've already done that. You're one step ahead of the game there, and it now allows us to be able to offer you this service. And so Brad and everyone, can you go ahead and can you see that screen? Looks like we're good. Okay, awesome. So SureVest, you can kind of see here, it's guaranteed protection for our landlords. And I won't spend too much time with this. I'd love to connect with you a little bit more if you would want to go through the pros of the service and how it works, and any additional questions. I can always get you this information as well. But as we take a look down here, we show what exactly this service covers. Now, just to be clear, this service is not meant to replace your standard homeowners insurance policy. We want to keep that in place. This is in addition to that, and it covers a little bit more things that only a landlord might see. So as you can see, a tenant skip or a lease break, tenant delinquency, whether it's eviction or root of possession obtained, tenant death, tenant murder, suicide, untenable due to malicious tenant damage, or malicious damage by tenant to the building only, victims of violence. And as you scroll down, you can see even further benefits: malicious damage, theft or damage due to theft to building and or context, eviction filing fees, eviction defense costs. It does cost our owners to go through an eviction, and this service can help cover those costs. Sheriff or marshal constable fees, lost due to digital lock boxes, several things. Really any worst case scenario you can think of, SureVestor's got some coverage available for our owners. And the nice thing is it's super simple. We partner with them, and we manage it all for you. You let us know if you want to go ahead and sign up for it. There's a flat monthly fee charged. It's $54.95 is what the current rate is at. But that covers for Welch Randall to cover all claims and any administrative work behind the scenes to make sure that all of that coverage is being provided to you. You'll see over here on the right side, eligibility criteria. There's a few items just to keep in mind that it doesn't cover for anything that's being rented below 1,000, and then the max coverage is up to 3,000. So that your property might not work within these criteria, but the majority of them should. So keep in mind, this is a great way to be able to take that extra step as a landlord to prepare for the worst, especially as times change, as people change, and you know, there's only so much that can be done before a person decides to you know, go off the path, and we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to feel that confidence in renting a property, because it's one of the great ways to invest. But like all investments, there is some risk, and this is the tool that's provided to help mitigate that.
Thomas,
Yes,
can I jump in really quick? You're welcome to keep the screen there.
of course.
One of the questions I recently got from an owner about SureVestor was they have a property that they're pretty confident is going to rent for above 3,000. And he had said, well, if that's the case, can I not get it at all? And I reached out to SureVestor on this, and SureVestor just said, no, they're welcome to get it. But if, say, it's renting for 3,400, then the rent protection, they would give up to 3,000. So they just won't cover that final $400. But it's not to say the coverage goes to zero if you're above. SureVestor said the bigger concern is if it doesn't rent for at least 1,000, they can't cover it at all. So if you have a property that's renting for less than that, which is pretty rare in Utah now, that's where the coverage kind of drops off. That's all I just wanted to bring up.
No, and thank you for the clarification. I appreciate it, Brad. That is true, and it does actually kind of talk about that a little bit more here in this eligibility criteria. But that's a great clarification, and so I appreciate that. That does kind of wrap up my little segment here on SureVestor. There's a lot of good information, and so please reach out to me if you want to learn a little bit more. It's really easy to be able to get you added, and it's also easy to get you removed. So it's a great kind of benefit to it. There's no locked-in contract. I manage all of our monthly reports for SureVestor, and so if you'd like to be opted in, we can get you opted in. If you use it for a couple months and decide it's not right for you, it's also, you know, at that point we can get you removed. So it's very flexible that way. They've been a fantastic team to work with, and we'd love to get you any additional information on SureVestor. Brad, I do see there's a question that just popped up. I don't know if we want to cover that now. Let's see.
Oh, if you have SureVestor coverage, do they pay the rent and then collect from the tenant, or do I have to continue the legal proceedings? So if there are legal proceedings, they work mostly with the payment of the rent, and they do go after some of the rent that is happening there. The issue, or it would kind of depend, if we're going through a full eviction, then it alters that a little bit. But Steve, it may be best we could help answer that offline, because it kind of depends in different scenarios, and it may be more of a longer conversation.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for that input there. And yes, Steve, we're always happy to connect with you to go through that question in more detail. So SureVestor, that's the number one tool, or the first tool for 2025 that we want to make sure you have access to. Moving on to the second one, this one's going to be something that is going to be very beneficial for not only you as the owner, but for us as a Welch Randall team. I'm super excited about this. Brad and I have been working with Ben from Blanket for the last couple of weeks to get this rolled out, and it's been rolled out, but we're still also kind of learning as we go, and we're excited to bring you more information. I won't go into too much explaining what Blanket is. We'll leave that to Ben, but it is going to be a great resource to help us understand a little bit more about your property's performance, and using Blanket's resources. I will be able to, as the owner relations manager, meet with each of you as an owner individually to review that performance and to discuss other strategies and other items that might be worthwhile to consider to increase your performance of that property, or better understand some directions you can take with it. And so without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Ben with Blanket. He's got a lot of good information, and he'll help you understand a little bit more about this dashboard. And we'll leave him some time at the end as well to do a Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to type those in. But Ben, it's over to you. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you.
Perfect. Well, Brad and Thomas, thank you guys for the opportunity to speak here today. And for all of the Welch Randall owners, I can tell you we're fortunate to work with hundreds of property managers across the country. And I can say, without a shadow of a doubt, you guys are working with some incredible people. So you've already made a great decision to work with the team. And I'm excited to speak to you a little bit about Blanket and how you can utilize this to benefit the investments that you currently have. So just a little background on me. My name is Ben. I lead partnerships and sales here at Blanket. I am also an investor myself in real estate. And what I've always desired in the past was the ability to take every kind of financial investment I have and put it into one spot, specifically on the real estate arm. I had copious amounts of spreadsheets and different graphs that I had built for myself to kind of keep track of that information. And so what Blanket is going to provide you as owners with the ability to see the full transparent viewpoint of how your property is doing. So the income and expenses will be there, but we will also go out and collect the property level information as well, so that you're able to see how the property is doing as a whole. I'm going to walk you through what that looks like here in just a moment. But the information that the team has already sent over to you or will send over to you, they'll give you login information as well, so that you guys will be able to access the portal here after we complete kind of my segment or the meeting here today. But again, thank you guys for the opportunity. I'm going to share my screen. This is my first time on RingCentral, so hopefully this works accordingly. Let's see here. Okay, can you guys see this okay? I can't see you, so let me go back over. You can see my screen, is that right?
We see it, Ben. Yep, thanks.
Okay, perfect. It's been a little bit. I'm usually a Zoom person. Okay, so as an owner, when you first log in, you'll be brought to your dashboard here. Now, there's a few things that you'll need to complete. I'm using this as kind of a demo representation of what you can expect to see. But you'll be able to input your property information. And so that will be confirming the mortgage information, confirming the purchase price, the purchase date, so on and so forth, so that we can populate the data accordingly. Once you've input that, you'll be able to come in here and also add any missing expenses. And so what happens is we pull all the income and expenses from your owner portal. And so what we're able to do is populate all of that for you. But there are certain data points that we might not be able to access, such as property taxes in some areas, and also insurance, and also HOA. So you may have to input insurance if the Welch Randall team does not pay that for you. Unfortunately, we can't collect that piece of information. And then we'll also input if it's in an HOA controlled neighborhood or not. So for instance, on this particular account, you will see the ability to add in insurance, add in property taxes, and add in HOA. So we will prompt you to do that. And then once you've filled out that information, you'll have a good representation of what your portfolio is doing from a value perspective, from an equity perspective, appreciation, net cash flow, NOI, cap rate, cash on cash, and then also a breakdown of the monthly expenses, again, once we have inputted the additional information that we need here. Now, this tool gives you all the abilities to see how the property is performing as a whole, and will also give the Welch Randall team the ability to be that trusted advisor for you and be able to help you make decisions strategically for what's next, whether you want to invest in additional opportunities, maybe you want to tap into some equity, you want to refinance, you want to take some of that cash flow that you've generated, as I mentioned, and buy more properties. This allows them to also partake in that information to help you guys from an informative perspective there. There's a couple other places here I'll show you. The transactions page will have all of your transactions listed that you would see on the property management software. But what you are also able to do is input any expenses that Welch Randall does not take care of for you. So perhaps you're from out of state and you fly into the area and you want to keep track of that auto and travel expense. You can input that information here. Perhaps you have a landscaper that comes in and refreshes the landscaping once a year or every couple of years. You can input that information here as well to keep track of. There's also a spot which we call owner benefits. And Thomas mentioned a little bit with SureVestor. Full disclosure, I used to work for Obi back in the day, and we had a good partnership with SureVestor. They're a wonderful product, so I encourage you to check that out. But there's some additional services that you might be able to utilize that have discounts already built into them for you. So the Welch Randall team is providing this as an opportunity for you to experience certain discounts, whether it be insurance, financing, 1031 exchange, so on and so forth. I won't take too much more of your time explaining kind of how it all works, but there is one other feature that I want to touch on, and that is the Performa. So you see the real-time analysis of how your portfolio or properties are doing. That's one other highlight, is if you do have more than one property, you're going to be able to see the individual performance of each of those. But you can also click on Performa and see what this property could look like over the next 25 years. You can edit these assumptions depending on the market, and the Welch Randall team can help you do that, so you can get an accurate representation of what the property might look like over the long term. But this is a way for you to evaluate, is this a property I want to hold for the long term? Is this something I might need to consider trading into something else, or reinvesting some of these future earnings into an additional asset there? So that's kind of the overview of what Blanket does from a product perspective. Again, it provides you with that financial transparency of how your property is doing. So you can utilize the owner portal for your income and expenses. You can utilize the investor dashboard to look at how that property is performing as a whole. And then the Welch Randall team will be able to assist you with any strategic decisions you might need to make concerning that portfolio there. Thomas, I know that was brief. I didn't want to spend too many minutes kind of going into the weeds with all of that, but I hope that gave your owners a little bit of an overview of how to utilize the platform. One thing before I do pass it back over or answer some questions, in order to kind of see the best benefit from the ownership or from your owners, or let me rephrase that, owners, in order to get the most value out of the Blanket dashboard, I would encourage you to log in, fill out any missing expenses, confirm the property level information is accurate. You'll also be receiving some instructions on how to save the Blanket platform on your iPhone or Android. So you'll have an app-like experience within your phone as well. So at any time, if you want to take a look at what's happening, you'll get instructions on how to do that as well. Thomas and Brad know this, but if you guys have any feedback or suggestions or questions regarding the product, my team is here to assist your owners and also you as well with whatever questions that might come up as they start to use this a little bit more. But we're excited to be partnering with you guys, and for your owners here, we're excited to provide this to you and hope you see the value in it there.
Ben, that was perfect. Thank you so much. It's good to get a glimpse of that portal for our owners that haven't had a chance to log in yet. And just keep in mind, if you can't find the invitation or whatever it is, we can get you a resend an invitation. I can help you get logged into this platform. It's really easy. As I mentioned previously, as we go through 2025, I will start, as we kind of approach the end, we do want to do performance reviews individually. And this Blanket platform is really going to come into hand at that point to be able to really allow us to analyze how your property is performing and any adjustments or new paths we can take with your property. And so I look forward to connecting with you guys on an individual level. And to utilize this Blanket platform. But it doesn't have to be until the end of the year. Please feel free to reach out to me. I want to make sure it can be a benefit to you year round. And so I'm always open to schedule a call to discuss Blanket as well as any other tools. Ben, thank you. Any other questions for Ben? I didn't see any pop-up Q&A. Brad, did you have any for Ben?
So having worked in this industry for a bit now, one of the things that has historically been lacking is when you manage a multifamily complex or something like that, there's tools out there that provide good financial data for larger complexes. The problem with that is when you own a townhouse that's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath that you lived in and then you turned into a rental, that same type of transparency has not existed unless you are an Excel guru or geek. And if you are, that's a great thing. That's not a knock on those people. But what Blanket is able to do, and why Welch Randall has felt really confident in kind of buying into this Blanket concept, is we want you to be able to look at your home similar to how others would look at anything in their investment portfolio. And the more information you have with that, you can see what it's doing, how it's performing, then when you have an expense that comes in that's unexpected, like a water heater replacement or something like that, sometimes we have owners that will say, I got to sell the property. I just had to pay $2,000 for this water heater. It's not going to work. And this gives you the chance to kind of zoom out and say, all right, first off, replacing a water heater sucks. We get that. But let's look over the last 5 years at how this has done. And let's look over the next few years, what we're anticipating. And you can kind of zoom out and view this as what it is, which is an asset. It is an investment. and not just something that you have to decide based on whether you have good tenants in that lease or not. So Ben and his team, they are a humble group, but they are an incredibly smart group. And what they're doing for the industry is a great thing. So we are very, very excited about the partnership that way. We had an owner just say, love the dashboard. Thank you so much. Megan, you are a perfect example because you have a townhouse that you lived in and now you're renting it out. So once again, this type of tool really was made for the mom and pop owners that are wanting to have good transparency and good data, but it just hasn't been available. So thank you so much. And Ben, thanks again for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for the opportunity.
So there will be some more info on investor tools coming up, but the last segment we wanted to focus in on today is related to a market update. We wanted to go through a market update to, oh, sorry, Ben, before you jump off, there's one more question for you. Go ahead, Megan, put it in the chat. While we're getting that question from Megan, we're going to do a brief market update. And the caveat I give is I am not an economist. I love to go through this stuff. I love to see it. And Welch Randall participates in a lot of different education to kind of see what's happening. And we've had experience long enough now that we can give some insight on our local market. But it's one of those things that we just feel strongly about. So we're excited to do a little market update. Now, the question for you, Ben, is when we go and add an expense, can we add a field for sewer? So I think in Blanket, when I was messing around with it, you could add as many of those, you can add multiple additional expenses, right?
Yeah, you can add as many expenses as you want. And Megan, I appreciate the question and also the compliment on the dashboard. Now, there are some limitations, as Megan is alluding to, with the optionality. We're working to add additional options there to cover kind of every expense you might have outside of the Welch Randall realm. For right now, we would suggest putting it in other. I know that's not ideal, but there should be a section where you can also add like a note, essentially, of what that other expense may be. I'll check on that to verify, but just know we are working to add additional optionality there for you to be able to categorize your additional expenses there.
Okay, that's perfect. Great. Thank you, Ben. So as you look at the market moving forward, 2024, I think the best way I can describe 2024 from an investment standpoint is meh. It was a meh year for Utah. We did see appreciation in our market, which is great. We saw about 3 to 5% appreciation, depending on where you were. But if you ask people how they feel the economy was doing in Utah and how rentals are doing in investment, most replied negatively. They thought it wasn't necessarily great. And part of the reasoning behind that is Utah has become expensive. What used to be a much more affordable state, Utah has seen a lot of growth in real estate value, and that has definitely shifted how investors are able to essentially play the game in Utah. Outside of that, it was an election year, and not necessarily the most friendly of elections, as we are all aware. It wasn't. It was just a challenging time that way. Lastly, the inventory did increase, but interest rates still remained high, and rental inventory also shot up more than we have seen in a long time in Utah. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the market updates. So I'm going to share my screen for just a few minutes, and we will share these slides with you as well, so that you can view them. Is this screen sharing okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, so as we look at the market projections, this is from a national standpoint. Now, I know these are projections, which means they can change. This can all change. But essentially, where we are is that mortgage rates, which are currently, as of this week, at a high over the last number of weeks, should dip back down. But before we get really excited, they are not going to be dipping down into the rate of 3%, 4% mortgages and things like that. I wish I could come on here and say that's what's going to happen, but it ain't going to happen, my friends. We are not going to see 4 or 5% mortgages, which means we are going to need to get used to the new normal of this mortgage rate. I have yet to see a projection consistently even near the 4% range. I saw a few that dipped into the 5% potentially. And I know that there's a group of people out there that says Trump is going to do it. It's not just Trump that does this. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But we do anticipate home prices are going to go up. Now, we'll talk about Utah specifically in just a minute on that. But right now, there is a trend in the United States where a lot of people are really sitting on their homes. And they're sitting on their homes for a few reasons. One, they've got a lot of equity built up in their homes. Think about your own personal home and maybe some of your investment properties. You have watched the value go up. You've been paying down that mortgage, or maybe it's even paid off, and people are sitting on that equity. The next thing is you may be sitting with the golden handcuff of a mortgage rate that you can't give up. So if you have a mortgage, there is a very high percentage of homeowners around the country, and even higher in Utah than the national average, of homeowners that have an interest rate that is very favorable, meaning 4% or under. If you've got a lot of equity in a home, as well as a very low a low interest rate, then there has to be a really compelling reason for you to move to give that up. And so most commonly, people are selling because they are moving out of the area or because they are moving in. But one of the markets that we are unfortunately losing are the first-time home buyers, the new home buyers, and our first-time investors. And our first-time investors are being lost because instead of living in the townhouse, then moving out and stepping into a bigger home, they are kind of trapped in that townhouse until for the foreseeable future because of interest rates. Now, there's a lot going on here, but this is comparing the first quarter of 2022 through 2025. Now, 2025 we're just in, so we don't have enough data on that. But let's look at this for a minute. Between 2022 and 2024, the average days on market went from 6 days in 2022 up to about 35 days the first quarter of 2024. On average, homes took even longer to sell in 2024 than 35 days. I ran this based on Davis County, Salt Lake, Utah, Weber, and Utah County. But it's one of those things that, for the most part, homes are taking longer to sell. For the most part, price reductions are happening on homes. And for the most part, people are not getting 100% on those homes as they're selling. Now, this represents the total number of sold residential listings. So 2021 was when we were back in the days of multiple offers and all of this stuff. Low interest rate, people were gobbling up properties. So we had over 4,000 between, in 2021 for the year as a whole. But if you look at 2024, we are still trending on the lower end. We're almost half of what was selling back in 2021. The interesting thing is the number of listings has gone up. So back in 2021, 2022, we had less listings, more were selling, better pricing for the seller. Things have shifted now to a buyer's market where less is selling, or less properties are selling. They're going for more of a discount. They're still selling, but it's taking longer and a lot more negotiation is happening. which does mean if you have the ability to potentially purchase a new property, then the ability to negotiate closing costs or a lower property price or even an interest rate buy down, that is happening a lot more right now. So quick 12-month history. Between January of last year and January of this year, the median days on market went from 35 days to 41 days. Typically and historically, the time where you get the best bang for your buck on a sale are April, May, June, and July in Utah. August, September, and March, those are kind of swing months, but you can see the median days on market, this far right column, goes from 35 days all the way down to 19 days in May. April, May, June, those are typically the time where you see the most coming to the market. It's also historically the time where you get the highest pricing as well, and the highest number of listings that are out there. And we anticipate that will hold the same in 2025. Utah, even though our pricing is more expensive, we still remain a very favorable state to invest in. And the reason being is, or to move into, and the reason being is we still have a lot of demand. We are actually not keeping up with the demand as what we should. And that sounds funny to say because we said there's homes that are sitting on the market longer, but essentially we need more inventory. In particular, we need more entry-level inventory to help account for the needs in these counties. We anticipate over the next 10 years that housing demand is meant to go or meant to be raised by 81,000 units over the next 10 years in Salt Lake County alone. St. George area in Washington County, almost 30,000 new units, and Utah County is literally competing with Salt Lake County at 71,000, nearly 72,000 needed units. And that is to keep up with migration growth and population growth. This is super interesting to me. Utah historically has been a state where people look to maybe rent initially and then buy. This has shifted to where Utah is now a state where it is cheaper to rent than it is to buy a property. That has consequences with it. It can be good and it can be bad. The good is when it is cheaper to rent, that means there's more demand for rental properties like the ones that you have. The bad thing about it is we need people buying properties because it gives you more opportunities to purchase as well. And it also gives more opportunities for people to move in that natural progression from renter to buyer to investor, which is what we want to see happen over time. The cost of renting versus owning is also at a historic high in the sense that there has never been a bigger gap. Now, if you look at the right side of this chart, the median monthly payment for a single family home right now in Utah is about $3,500, whereas the median single family rent is $2,166. Rent has not kept up with inflation and appreciation and pricing competition that has happened in the state on the purchase side. And that means that there is a big gap there. And you've probably seen that if you've been interested in potentially buying a property in Utah. The gap is so large that a lot of people have said, I can't afford Utah anymore because they have to put 40% down. Now, from an inventory standpoint, this also has created complications. I pulled this data just this morning. So we're talking, January 13th. Lehigh alone has 208 properties that are being marketed just on Rentler alone. 2 years ago, at this time of year, there was less than 50. So we have nearly 4 times the amount of inventory than what we saw a couple years ago. We've also seen a ton of new properties hit the market over the last 2 years. Most of these have been in the form of newer apartments and newer townhomes. We've even seen large corporate buyers come in and buy 30, 40, 50, 60 single family homes, townhomes, and then they own all of them and rent them out. This is shifting the market landscape. And as you can see on this, once again, this was pulled today. Every one of these properties right here is offering a move-in special. So as the supply has increased in 2023 and 2024, the demand dips because there's just more out there. People can say, well, if I'm paying $1,600 for a 30-year-old townhouse, and now there's an apartment with pool, workout room, and they're giving me 60 days of free rent, that is something that, depending on what size property you have, you'll have to compete with. You can also see this is the number of housing permits that were created. So the total units, which is that top green line, peaked in 2021. We had 40,000 permits. Now, we talked about the supply really growing in Utah. That is growing because all of those permits that were pulled in 2021 started coming to the market in 2023 and 2024, which means as those hit the market, we had a flood of new properties that were competing. So you as owners and us as the property manager, we are now looking to try to find new ways to say, okay, how do we have your property compete when there's brand new apartments, all with all these different features? What can we do to help either keep a resident in your property, or what can we do to help make your property more desirable? Now, this is some data from ShowMojo, which is our coordinator for all of our self-showings, as well as a lot of our leads. ShowMojo is our largest contributor to leads because they syndicate a lot of data. The average days on the market from a national standpoint, and Utah's no exception, was at its highest in 2024 as it's been in the last 5 years. That is, challenging. The only thing that competes was 2023. Now, this data ran up through August of last year. They haven't released the final 2 quarters, but from what I've gathered is it's similar to 2023. So the average days on market is going up, and the percent of lease listings with at least one rent reduction is also going up. So when we tell you or give recommendations on a range, we are trying to price it as competitively as possible to be able to help that property lease as quickly as possible. Now, there's a lot going on with this chart, but ultimately some things to be aware of are this. We are seeing and we anticipate that rent in 2025 is still going to remain somewhat steady, but that supply is going to be an issue, which means pricing and aggressive pricing and trying to do a 5 to 10% bump and things like that is more than likely not going to happen. Utah is in a place where we are going to see moderate, no to lower moderate rent growth and supply growth as well. So with that, and this talks about apartments in general, single family actually fares a little bit better than apartments. And that's because there are less single family markets, or less single family homes than there are multifamily apartments out on the market. So what does this mean for you all? We are anticipating that while rent will remain mostly steady, that also means it's probably not going to be super aggressive. We also anticipate that your residents right now are going to be hit with a lot of ads and things like that. And as they're driving around, they're going to see concessions increase, which means they're going to see, and your property is going to be competing with them as well. Then you're going to see that single families, they are generally going to fare a little bit better with vacancy than the smaller units like condos and 1-2 bedrooms. Those are going to experience higher vacancy because more people are competing with them and more properties are. Single family, what you're going to be looking at is looking for ways to keep the residents in place. If they've been paying, then we want to work with you to try to keep them there. And that may involve a discussion about updating windows, updating carpet, providing a free carpet cleaning, something like that. We want to look for ways to keep good tenants in place. If they haven't been good tenants, then we want to move them out. And there's some good options for that. But Utah is going to be a place where we're going to, unless interest rates take a big dip or something else affects the supply, we are not going to necessarily see a huge growth in 2025 in rents or things like that. So as you look at that, you may say, wow, this is kind of doom and gloom. We actually don't feel that way. Utah is faring a lot better than a lot of other states. Having said that, we also want to try to help prepare for that. And our next owner meeting is going to be entirely focused on changes to our systems, procedures, even personnel that are being done to try to minimize vacancy on the market and to try to help maximize our advertising and to help maximize the ROI that you are getting. And just a quick preview on that, because we will send more info out on that, but Welch Randall has invested more in the last 6 months to our own systems, our own personnel, our own technology, and our own offerings to try to help better the ROI for our owners. We've invested more in the last 6 months than probably the last 3 or 4 years combined. We've been doing a large investment into this because we see the importance of this in the market. So some of the changes that you can anticipate are we have a new director of maintenance. I mean, she's not new, she's newer, but Natalie Langdon, her role has been to help on a number of levels, but one of her key roles is how can we do turns faster for owners? How can we increase our vendors? How can we get more contractors in place so that we have less time off market? She's done a fabulous job with that. And we are now pushing that even further this year. The next thing we're looking at is what are things that we can do to advertise better? What are places that people are looking? Are there tours or things that we can provide that would help? As many of you know, for a lot of our properties, as long as it works out, safety-wise and things like that, we've been starting to offer self-shows. As we've offered self-shows, that has increased the number of showings exponentially and decreased vacancy time. Now, it doesn't work for every property, but self-shows offer a great opportunity for a lot of our owners and properties. The next thing we're looking at is what can we do to help improve our renewal rate? Our renewal rate is historically high. We're higher than the national average for sure. But it's something that we really want to improve on. If we know that it's going to take longer to fill, then what are things that residents want and residents are requesting that will help them stay? And we have been making changes to that to make sure that there's more flexibility that way. So these are some of the changes that over the next 6 to 8 weeks, you're going to be hearing more about. And this is also one of those great reasons why we have Thomas in the role that he's in, so that as these changes come about, if you want to talk through those some more, you have a great initial resource to be able to do that. Now, before we close today, are there any final questions or anything like that? Once again, we will share this recording, we'll share the PDFs and all that good stuff. But are there any final questions for any of us today before we close? Okay, with that in mind, from all of us at Welch Randall, and I mean this incredibly genuinely, we cannot thank you enough for your trust in us and for the opportunity to work with you. We love the opportunity it is and the great honor it is to get to know you, to get to know your properties better, and to take on these new challenges every single day. We have a phrase that we use often in our office, which is, and Thomas is going to get annoyed because I say it almost every day, but never a dull day in this industry. And Jeremy knows this in what he does on the legal side. There is never a dull day. Every day we have to stay sharp. We have to look for better ways to do things. And your feedback has been paramount on that. as Thomas has met with people, as I've met with people, as we've seen things happen, we really rely heavily on what concerns you have. It is because of concerns and questions that you had that we ended up signing up with Blanket, that we ended up hiring Thomas, that we ended up bringing Natalie into the role that she's in. So your feedback helps really shape our future. And we are so grateful to work with you and just appreciative of this opportunity. So we wish you a happy 2025. We feel very positive about the future forward. It is not without challenges, and we are here to meet you at those challenges, but we feel super excited. So thanks again. And to Thomas, Jeremy, and Ben, thank you so much for your participation today and for your partnership with Welch.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Brad.